Was the show always called American Pickers?
Yeah, I was pitching it as antique archaeology at first, the name of my business, and then about 3 years into pitching it, everybody's like, the first thing we're going to tell you is to lose the word antique, because no one will watch your tape if it has the word antique in it.
Interesting.
So I came up with the name American Pickers about probably 4 years ago, and then history, when they got it, they were going to call it Rust Brothers. And we did all these promos, Merry Christmas from Rust Brothers, Snobby Da, Rust Brothers, and they shot all this footage, and then they never Googled Rust Brothers. It's taken.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, they spent tens of thousands of dollars.
It's taken?
It's taken. It's a body shop.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So they're like, well, we're kind of like American Pickers, but no one's going to know what a picker is. And I said, well, you're the History Channel. You're supposed to educate people. Aren't you? They're like, yeah. So now everything's American. American Restoration, American Pickers, American Treasures. You know, so it's cool. And the reason I came up with American Pickers is because I've been to Italy and overseas picking a couple times, and I've met pickers from all over the world. You know, so we're the American Pickers, all of us. You know, not just me and Frank.
Well, let me ask you this: out of all of the time that you've been picking, but let's specifically focus on the show, because you come across stuff that you guys sometimes want, and sometimes these guys won't part with it. Personally, what's the one item you really, really wanted but could not get?
The banner.
Yeah. No, it's anything really motorcycle related, you know? I mean, I love anything with two wheels and a motor on it. And I've found some really rare motorcycles. I mean, like one-off stuff or collections, and it's, you know, I can't buy them, you know? And I still try to buy them to this day. Every once in a while, we'll have Danielle call the person and say, hey, has anything changed in your life? Do you feel like selling anything? I mean, that's really what drives me. And that's what started antique archaeology, really, was I was hunting down rare motorcycles for a buddy of mine that owns the National Motorcycle Museum, and while I was out there and doing all this, I was finding all these antiques as well, and I had these antique dealers, and they're like, you're in these barns all the time, don't you see all this other stuff? And I'm like, I see that stuff all the time. And they're like, well, you need to start buying it and selling it to us. And I was like, okay, so, you know, that's how that kind of rolled.
So flip side of the coin, what's the, can you actually narrow down the greatest pick you've ever gotten?
I got into a barn in right outside of Philadelphia about 8 years ago. It had 12 Indians in it, 12 Indian motorcycles.
Wow.
And I found that from an ad the guy ran in 1972. I called the ad, and he's like, yeah, I still got an Indian. I said, well, are you interested in selling? He goes like, well, I might sell it. I drove from my house to Philadelphia that night, spent the night in his driveway, woke up and knocked on his door. I said, I'm the guy that you talked to on the phone yesterday. Can I look at the Indian? And he's like, well, yeah. So we opened the garage door, and I ended up buying the Indian off him. And he's like, well, you need to come back some other time. And he took me next door to this other property he had. And, you know, we couldn't get the garage door open. You had to use a jack. It was like that scene from Silence of the Lambs. Yeah, we're like trying to get in there, you know, and open the door. And I looked in there, and there was all these motorcycles, and the roof had caved in. And,
oh, man.
And he's like, well, you have to come back sometime. And I was like, I'll be back.
Wow.
So I got back there about 2 days later, and I couldn't load all this stuff. So I hired these kids across the street. They were like 14 years old, and they were like, I was like, I'll give you guys $100 a piece if you help me load this stuff up. And I worked them so hard they both puked. They quit.
Edited for television.
I wish I would have had a video camera
back then. What's the furthest you've ever? I mean, furthest you've ever traveled to go get something?
Right after 9/11, a buddy and I went to Italy, and we brought back a container load of Vespas. And it was just amazing. It was so many things I had seen before. We went to an antique motorcycle meet in Milan. And that's where I met the Italian pickers. And let me tell you, they're rough. Man, I mean, they're like rough. But it's funny because when you start negotiating with the Italians, like you'll be in a swap meet space, you know, just with a bunch of junk laying around.
There's no negotiating with the Italians.
Yeah, I'm half Italian. And they'll have a bottle of wine and some cheese, and you sit there and you talk to them, and you start talking price after about an hour of this, you know. So it was interesting. We had an interpreter, and it was a great trip. So that was the farthest I've gone.
The farthest you've ever gone for that. Now let me ask you this: when you're looking and picking, we were talking about, what do you think the historical timeline cutoff is these days? I mean, like, you know, everything you find, like, oh, this is from this particular era and the 40s, the 50s. I mean, what is the historical timeline cutoff where something's just not worth picking anymore? And do you think it's a kind of a follow-up question as well? What do you think is going to be worth picking 40 years from now?
Yeah. Well, you know, the older you get, that timeline changes.
Right.
You know, like I graduated from high school in 1982, and that stuff's hot now. You know,
right?
So, you know, I like, the thing is about picking and collecting things is, you know, I've always bought what I liked, you know, and I've been very lucky that way. And it really, no matter how much you read in a book or how much you can understand on a page, you know, you still have to have a good eye, you know,
right.
and you have to be able to think out of the box. And some of the stuff that we're talking about from the 80s, you know, all this, you know, the music, obviously, and you know, the decor, a lot of that's becoming hot now. The things that I think will be collectible in the future are anything that's made by artisans, you know, anything that's handmade. Everything's so mass-produced now. Like, I just bought a couple chairs, these aviator chairs from Restoration Hardware. Have you guys seen those in the catalog? They're amazing. Well, they're made in England by a guy, by hand. He's only making a limited number of them, and I think they'll be collectible. They'll be like an Ames lounge chair someday. You know.
So you actually do buy stuff from real stores?
Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, my house is not like, you know, Little House on the Prairie or something. No, I like some modern, some contemporary. You know, I've gone through the primitives and